Hello, and welcome to another Social Studies Canvas module. Today we're going to be talking about the French and Indian War. So, as the colonies begin to grow, there's a conflict that arises between the French and the British. So, by the 1750s, the British had claimed control over the Ohio River Valley just across the Appalachian Mountains from the British colonies. Meanwhile, the French had built forts along the Great Lakes, and they too also claimed control over the Ohio River Valley southwest of their settlements. So the conflict happens over territory and who controls that territory. Before and during the war, there was this attempt to unify the colonies. One particular attempt was called the Albany Plan of Union. This was created by Benjamin Franklin, and he used cartoons to try to convince the colonists to unify. One particular cartoon was called the Join or Die cartoon, and like I said, the purpose was to convince the colonies to unite and fight against the French. Unfortunately, they rejected it at this time. So the war breaks out in 1754, and it happens between the British and the French, and they're fighting over who controls the territory of the Ohio River Valley. That's a mouthful. Because many of Indian tribes sided with the French, the conflict became known as the French and Indian War. It's important to note that the French were not fighting against the Indians, they were fighting with the Indians against the British. The main battleground was located on the borders of Canada and the Hudson River, and British forces had started to make more advances in the war by capturing the French city of Quebec in 1759 and also the city of Montreal in 1760. And they win the war. The British win the war in the French and Indian War. So, some of the spoils of this war included territory, and they signed a peace treaty in 1763 called the Treaty of Paris. And under the terms of this treaty, France lost most of its colonial empire in the North America. Like I said, some of the spoils for the British included this. Their victory gave them control over the St. Lawrence River, that's just north of Maine, and they seized control of most French colonial territories in North America, including Canada and all the lands east of the Mississippi River. Another effect of the war was the Proclamation Line of 1763. So all that territory was opened up after they beat the French. However, King George III of Britain, he issued a royal proclamation preventing any Indian attacks with the colonists, and he declared that those colonists could not settle west of the Appalachian Mountains. He didn't want any more conflicts to happen with those natives. And to enforce this royal proclamation, he sends 10,000 British redcoats, that's British soldiers, and he assigns them to the colonies to enforce this proclamation. So when you have a lot of soldiers staying in a post, they're going to need a place to stay, and then they're going to need something to eat. And so he also issues the Quartering Act of 1765. This required the colonists to provide food and shelter for the British soldiers. Many of the colonists saw this evidence of British's desire to continue controlling the colonies. Another big effect of this war was the debt. They had spent a lot of money fighting in this war, and it caused the British government to go deeply into debt. And so one of the ways that the British government is going to try to pay back this debt is that they're going to make legislation increasing taxation on their colonies to pay back this debt. Some of those taxation acts or laws included the following. The Navigation Act, which was actually issued back in 1651, but because of salutary neglect and the distance, it was hard to enforce this law. Another policy that they're going to enforce is the Sugar Act of 1764, the Stamp Act in 1765, and then the Townshend Act in 1767. The colonists are not going to like this at all. Their response to this is actually no taxation without representation. The idea is that they want their voice to be heard in British Parliament, as any other English citizen has. So that concludes our discussion on the French and Indian War. We do know that the cause of the war was over the territorial dispute of who controlled the Ohio River Valley. Some of the effects included the Treaty of Paris of 1763. It included the Proclamation Line of 1763. It also included debt, that because the British had spent a lot of money, they needed to pay back this debt. And then there was also territories that were claimed because of the war. Thank you for watching.